It was the way they spoke that first caught your attention. How their voice echoed in a room like it had something important to say even when it was just about a simple grocery list. There was a charisma to them, an almost magnetic pull that drew every pair of eyes. I remember how they would weave their stories, casting themselves as the hero in every narrative. Everyone laughed. Everyone admired. And in those moments, I felt proud to be with them. But I didn't know then that pride was just another form of submission. Did you see the way they all looked at me? They asked one night after a dinner party. They think I'm brilliant, don't they? They just get me. I nodded as I always did. You were amazing, of course. But inside, a strange unease began to stir. Not because of what they said, but because of how I said it. How I couldn't remember the last time I had been me in a room. How I was reduced to a reflection, a shadow. I don't think you understand, they continued, leaning in as though sharing some intimate secret. I need people to understand. I need them to know how important I am. You get that, right? Their eyes searched mine with a fierceness as though waiting for confirmation. And I gave it, of course. What else could I give? The words spilled from my mouth like an echo, repeating the praises they so desperately craved. Of course I do. You're important. But the word felt hollow when it left my lips. As if it was theirs, not mine. My voice wasn't my own. It was molded by their need. The cycle was slow, subtle, but it was there. They didn't need to hurt me. They didn't have to raise their voice or belittle me. No, the real damage was far more insidious. It was in the constant need to make me mirror them, to reflect their world, their greatness, their insecurities. The more I gave them what they wanted, the more I faded into the background. The days blurred into one. We go for walks, but it was never about us. It was about them. They'd talk about their latest achievement, their newest conquest, the people who admired them, the people who envied them. And I would smile and nod because that's what you do when someone shines too brightly for you to see yourself. When I tried to speak of something, anything, a thought, a feeling, a hope, they would dismiss it, not with anger, but with indifference. You really think that matters? We're talking about me right now. And so I would fall silent. The space between us growing wider, though I couldn't feel it at the time. I thought it was normal. This was love, wasn't it? Wasn't this what it meant to be seen, to be part of something greater? I became their emotional mirror. My needs faded, my identity dulled. I stopped asking for anything because every time I did, it felt as though I was interrupting the performance. Their grand performance, where I was cast as the quiet, supportive partner, the one who clapped when told, who smiled when prompted. And when I tried to stand in the spotlight for just a moment, when I tried to take center stage even for a second, they pulled the curtain. Not now, they would say, their voice laced with a feigned smile. It's not about you right now. You know that. No, I didn't know that. But I accepted it because how could I not? They were so convincing, so masterful in their control. It didn't start with abuse. It started with admiration. And before I knew it, I had forgotten what it meant to admire myself. At first, I was proud to be their cheerleader. I thought it was love, that's what love was supposed to be, right? Supporting them, lifting them higher, clapping after every win, even when it felt like I was losing myself in the process. They were brilliant after all. The world knew it. And so did I. But what began as a spontaneous celebration of their greatness slowly turned into something else. Something quieter. More insidious. I remember one night, sitting at the dinner table after a particularly long argument. I hadn't said the right thing. I hadn't agreed in the way I was supposed to. They had called me out sharply, cruelly. I tried to defend myself, to explain, but the words I spoke only seemed to dig the hole deeper. When it was over, they sat back, arms crossed, eyes cold. Silence. And that was the worst part. I tried to break the silence, to fix it, but they just sat there, staring, withdrawing. The coldness in their gaze settled into my chest like ice. I knew what was coming. The punishment, the emotional withdrawal. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My heart pounded, and for the first time I felt afraid. Not of them physically, but of losing them in a way that cut far deeper. I apologized. For everything. I made excuses for them. For their words, their anger. And they nodded, their expression unreadable. It's fine, they said, their voice distant. But you need to learn how to support me better. I was always supporting, but now it felt like something I had to do, not something I wanted to do. The applause wasn't a gift I gave anymore. It was something I owed them. If I didn't, the silence would stretch longer. The distance would grow colder. I began clapping harder, smiling wider, loving more. But the harder I tried to make them happy, the further away I felt from myself. Every smile felt like a mask, every laugh a lie. My hands bled beneath the weight of my own applause. I clapped with hands raw from overcompensating. I laughed louder, hoping to drown out the guilt that clawed at my chest. My love, my support was no longer a choice. It was a survival tactic. I didn't want to be punished again. I didn't want them to pull away. So I gave more and more, until the sound of my own clapping seemed distant, muffled, lost in the hollow echo of my empty gestures. And every time I apologized for their mistakes, every time I made myself small to fit their idea of what I should be, I felt the distance grow. I wasn't their partner anymore. I wasn't someone they loved. I was just a prop, a tool in their performance. I wasn't applauding out of affection. I was applauding out of fear. Fear of the silence. Fear of their anger. Fear of disappearing completely. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't enough. Not as myself. Only as an extension of them. Only as someone who reflected their image, their greatness. And as I clapped harder, I could feel myself slipping away. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakup. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears. There was only a quiet mourning. I remember it clearly. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, spilling over the countertop, casting long shadows across the table. You sat there, eating your cereal like you always did, talking about the people who had praised you at work, how they couldn't stop talking about your brilliance. Your hands moved, gesturing as though the words coming from your mouth had weight, as though they mattered. I didn't hear you anymore, not the way I used to. I stared at my coffee cup, the steam rising in delicate spirals, and something inside me broke, not in a loud, violent way. It wasn't like the world shattered. It was just a quiet realization that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, you would never be full. You would always remain empty. I didn't feel the need to fill that space anymore. The familiar ache to soothe you, to make you whole, had faded into nothingness. When you reached for my hand, as you always did after your performance, a touch that was meant to reassert your control, your dominance, I didn't take it. My hand remained by my side, still and unmoving. The touch you sought didn't come. You looked at me, confused, maybe even a little hurt, but I didn't react. I just let the silence settle between us like a thick fog, suffocating the air. You cleared your throat, and I felt the tension rise in the room. But I stayed still, not angry, not sad, just still. There was no part of me left that needed to speak. No part that needed to explain myself or apologize. I didn't need to soothe your ego anymore. I didn't need to fill the void you carried within you. When I didn't respond to your probing questions, when I didn't mirror your enthusiasm or feed your need for attention, you grew restless. You kept talking, but the words were hollow. They bounced off me like I was invisible. The car ride was the same. You drove. I stared out the window. I didn't notice when your voice stopped. I didn't hear when you glanced at me, hoping for a reaction. The silence between us grew thick, and I felt it in my bones. And when I didn't answer your message that night, when I didn't rush to explain why I was silent, it hit you. You had lost control. You had lost your audience. You could feel it in the air. The power, the attention, the spotlight you depended on was gone. You were still on stage, but no one was watching. For the first time, the script didn't play. And you noticed. You felt the absence. You were frantic, unsure of how to handle it, but the more you reached for me, the more I withdrew. You were left with nothing but your own echo, your own reflection, and it wasn't enough. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to leave. I didn't need a grand exit. All I had to do was lower my hands. And in that stillness, I realized something. For the first time, I was alive without you. They came at me with everything they had. At first, it was subtle. They tried to poke at my silence with questions, sharp, loaded ones that carried the weight of their accusations. Why are you so cold? Are you really that selfish? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. But there was no rise in my chest, no tightening of my throat, no flutter of anxiety. I just sat there, my eyes meeting theirs with a stillness that felt foreign even to me. They didn't know how to handle it, and that, I think, was the first crack in their armor. They tried again, louder this time, with the words they always knew would hurt. You don't even care, do you? All this time, all the sacrifices I made, and now you're just going to walk away. Still nothing. The air between us thickened, but I remained motionless, unmoved. I could see it in their eyes, confusion, frustration, then a flicker of fear. It was subtle at first, a brief moment when their eyes flickered, like a broken television struggling to find a signal. They jabbed harder. You're ungrateful. You've always been ungrateful. Nothing. They shifted tactics. The charm, the sweetness they had once used to pull me back in, surfaced. Come on, baby, you're just upset. We can work this out. I didn't mean to hurt you. Let me make it up to you. Just talk to me. Their voice was soft, almost seductive. But I saw it, the desperation in their eyes, the mask slipping. And I didn't bite. I didn't soften. I simply watched like a spectator watching someone scramble for the last piece of control they thought they had. They began to pace, hands running through their hair. You really think you can just ignore me? You really think you can just leave me like this? Their voice broke, a rare crack in the facade, and for a fleeting second, I saw their true fear, losing me. Not because they loved me, but because without me they were nothing. Without my reflection, they could not exist. They couldn't feel their power. They couldn't see their image reflected back. They were no longer the main character in my mind. I wasn't clinging to their every word, their every movement. They were no longer the center of my universe. And they realized it too late. The insults came next, sharper and more pointed. You're nothing without me. You'll never find anyone like me. You'll regret this. No one else will ever love you the way I do. But my silence was a force they couldn't break. It was like static on an old radio, crackling, loud, but utterly meaningless. Their words bounced off me. Their attempts to seduce, to guilt, to manipulate, all of it fell flat like a remote control trying to turn on a TV that wasn't plugged in. The more they pushed, the more they tried to regain control, the more their actions felt hollow. Their tactics were predictable, robotic, a script that no longer held any weight. I saw them unraveling, not through rage but through confusion. They didn't know what to do when their usual tools didn't work. The pieces of their mask began to slip, revealing the panic underneath. You can't just leave me, you know? You're making a mistake, they whispered, almost pleading now, their voice wavering. But I didn't flinch. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain why I wasn't playing their game anymore. In their frantic attempts, I saw the truth. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were terrified of losing the reflection I had once given them. They were terrified of not being seen, of disappearing into nothingness. And for the first time, I felt pity not for the pain they were causing me, but for the emptiness that haunted them. The absence they feared so much was the very thing I had begun to embrace. I wasn't playing dead. I was waking up. And nothing at all frightened them more than that. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It wasn't an act of revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was something quieter. Something more painful. It was simply the absence of effort. The end of the fight that had dragged on for far too long. I didn't block them out of hate. I didn't shut them out because I was angry, though I was angry. I didn't leave to prove a point, though I knew they'd try to make it about that. I simply stopped shrinking. For years, I had bent myself into the shape they wanted, contorting to fit into a space that wasn't mine. I had spoken louder, laughed harder, apologized faster, all to fill the hollow gap they called love. But I had nothing left to give, nothing left to fill. And so I stopped. I stopped trying to be heard by someone who only listened to their own voice. I stopped reaching for the words that had never mattered. It wasn't an explosion. There was no violent storm, no clash of voices or shattered glass. There was only stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything I hadn't said before. The words I'd swallowed down over and over, the thoughts I had stifled to keep the peace, all of it swirled in the air, thickening the space between us. It spoke louder than any argument could. It said, "I've said it all." It said, "I'm done trying to be heard by someone who only listens to themselves." The words never needed to come out. The silence itself was a loud declaration, one they couldn't ignore, one they couldn't twist or manipulate. For the first time, I didn't need to speak to make my point. I didn't need to shout or cry or plead. I simply chose not to shrink anymore. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. Their voice tried to fill the void, it always did, but it fell flat. The empty space where my words used to be grew heavier with each passing moment. The storm inside of them raged, I could feel it. The questions, the accusations, the manipulations. But it didn't touch me. I was still. I was clear. I thought back to all the times I had tried to speak over their chaos. The times I raised my voice only to have it swallowed by theirs. The times I tried to matter, to be seen, to be heard, and every time I was reduced to silence. I remembered how I had fought to keep my place beside them, how I had begged for a piece of the attention, the admiration, the recognition they craved. I had played my part, but the cost had been my own voice. And now, in the quiet, I saw the truth. I wasn't the one who had been silenced. They were. Their voice, the one that had once filled the room, now echoed hollow. I could see it in the way they shifted uncomfortably, trying to fill the silence with distractions, with words that were meaningless. They no longer knew what to do with it. For the first time, they were left alone with themselves. The admiration they had relied on, the control they had held so tightly, was gone. The silence made them face the one thing they feared most, the emptiness that lay beneath their performance. They had always been the star of their own show. But now, for the first time, they heard nothing but their own voice, and it terrified them. There was no one to mirror them, no one to feed their need for validation. The applause, the adoration, the constant attention they craved, it was all gone. All that remained was their own hollow echo. And for me, that silence was victory. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to scream or shout or even leave. I simply needed to stop trying to be part of their world. Because in the end, the silence spoke louder than any words ever could. They moved on fast. Too fast. At first, it seemed like a rebound, a shallow attempt to fill the hole I had left behind. New selfies, new captions, new validation. The same patterns recycled. I saw it from the outside, but I felt nothing. They were trying to convince themselves that the new audience could replace me. That this new person, this reflection, would mirror their greatness the way I once had. They posted their new adventures, plastering smiles across pictures that felt rehearsed. They smiled wider, laughed louder, took endless pictures to show the world that they were fine, that they were better. But beneath the shiny facade, there was something missing. It was obvious to anyone who could see. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. The laughs were hollow, forced. It was the same performance, but this time without the soul. The new audience didn't understand them the way I did. They applauded, but there was no depth in their claps. It was empty praise. It was a round of applause for a show that no longer had substance. The new person, the new reflection, didn't give them what I had, the sincerity, the truth. Because I wasn't just supply. I wasn't just the mirror they used to see themselves through. I had given them something they couldn't fake, something that went beyond the surface. I had been real. I had seen them, truly seen them, even in their worst moments. I had been the one who believed their lies, who forgave their flaws, who filled their emptiness. But the new audience? They only saw what was in front of them, and that was never enough. The new relationship was a game, a scripted performance where both parties tried to act their parts. But the authenticity was gone. It was artificial. The new person wore the mask, played the role, but they never learned the lines. They couldn't mirror their fantasies the way I had. I could feel it even from a distance, the forced intimacy. The awkward pauses when the narcissist reached for something that wasn't there. The uncertainty when their new audience didn't respond the way I had. Because the applause was different. It wasn't mine. It wasn't real. And soon, the new audience noticed it too. They didn't stick around. They saw through the cracks. They saw that the performance wasn't as captivating without the sincerity behind it. They didn't stay long. They were just another part of the endless cycle of replacement, and they too left when the show got boring. They were just another mirror, and mirrors don't love back. The narcissist kept trying, but the effort was exhausting. They were desperately pulling in new faces, new reflections to fill the void. But none of them could match what I had given them. The mask was never a perfect fit. They could never replace me. And the show? It was nothing without the depth I had provided. Without my spirit. The applause may have been louder, but it didn't echo the way it used to. It was just noise. Because when they couldn't find me in the crowd, when they couldn't find someone who saw them as I had, they realized the truth. The new audience couldn't stay. The show was boring without me. They thought they'd lost attention. They thought they had been abandoned by the audience, the applause, the constant praise, the validation. But what they didn't understand was that they hadn't just lost attention. They had lost something far more vital. They had lost energy. The lights, once so bright, began to flicker. Their stories, which had once sounded profound and filled with meaning, now felt hollow, empty. The applause they'd sought could no longer fuel them. Without me, without the spark I had given them, their world seemed muted, distant. It was as though they were walking through a room that had once been vibrant and full of life, but now it was dim, gray, lifeless. I wasn't just watching. I wasn't just a passive spectator in their performance. I was the lens they used to create meaning in their lives. Without me, their narrative crumbled. The tales they told, once bursting with depth and power, now lay flat. I was the light they needed to shine. I was the one who brought color to their world. Without my gaze, they faded into the background, no longer the center of their own universe. The spotlight they had once commanded felt cold. The stage they stood on was barren. It wasn't just attention I had given them. It was my belief. It was my energy. It was the force behind their every word, their every movement. I had been the one powering their show, unknowingly becoming the electricity that kept the lights on. They didn't realize it, but I was the one who had made their life seem meaningful. And now, without my gaze, without my energy, they were nothing but noise. The words they spoke didn't carry weight anymore. They weren't profound. They weren't deep. They were just sounds bouncing off the walls, echoing back in their emptiness. The realization hit them hard. They tried to turn it back on, to find a way to plug back in, but it was too late. The power was gone. The energy that had once fueled their existence had been unplugged. The room had gone dark. I was the one who had given them light. I was the one who had breathed life into their words, into their every action. And when I unplugged, when I stopped fueling their fantasies with my attention, the darkness set in. They realized with a sinking heaviness that they weren't the stars. They were just performers in a show that couldn't run without an audience. But I wasn't the audience. I was the power source. And when I unplugged, the lights went out. You didn't shout your comeback. You didn't declare war. You didn't need revenge. There was no need to fight, no need to scream. You had been loud enough for too long, your voice drowning in the echoes of their demands, their control. But now, in the stillness, you found something far more powerful than all the noise you had once created. You healed quietly. It wasn't in grand gestures or explosive moments. It wasn't in the words you would have once spoken to prove yourself. It was in the simplicity of your days, in the small rituals that were once lost to the chaos of trying to fit into someone else's world. Morning walks, bare feet brushing against the damp grass, the coolness of the earth grounding you. You didn't need anyone else to notice, to applaud. It was enough just to feel the air fill your lungs, to hear the rustle of the trees without the pressure of performing for someone else's approval. You lit candles in the evening, the soft flicker of the flames illuminating the quiet corners of your home. There was no urgency, no need to rush. The flickering light didn't demand attention. It just was. And for the first time in so long, you simply existed. You laughed freely and without hesitation. You didn't need anyone's permission to be happy, to find joy in the little moments. You laughed at the things that used to make you feel guilty, a joke with friends, a funny movie that made you giggle alone in the dark. You didn't need to apologize for it. There was no one to explain your laughter to, no one to justify it to. It was yours. And as the days passed, you stopped explaining yourself. You stopped justifying your heart. You didn't have to tell anyone why you did the things you did, why you felt the way you did. There was no need to beg for understanding or validation. In that stillness, you found your voice. It wasn't loud or demanding. It wasn't for show or for anyone else to hear. It was quiet, gentle, and it was yours. It was the voice that had been buried under the weight of someone else's performance, the voice that had been ignored and silenced for so long. You whispered to yourself the things you had once been afraid to say aloud. Small affirmations. Gentle truths. I am enough. I don't need to prove myself. My worth is not for anyone else to determine. You spoke to yourself with the kindness you had once reserved for others. And for the first time, your voice wasn't a tool for validation or performance. It wasn't something to be shaped by someone else's hands. It was simply yours. And that was enough. Not for attention. Not for praise. For peace. They couldn't accept your absence. They couldn't bear the thought that you had walked away without looking back. Without the drama, without the closure they so desperately craved. So they rewrote the ending. In their version, they were the hero. They were the victim. They changed, they told anyone who would listen. They were too much. They walked away for no reason. But in their eyes, the truth was too raw. Too painful. If they admitted the truth, they'd have to face themselves. The cracks in their carefully constructed image would shatter, and they couldn't allow that. So they clung to the fiction they'd created, a story where they were justified, where you were the one who had hurt them, the one who had abandoned them for no reason at all. They lied to others. They told them tales of your coldness, your selfishness, your inability to understand them. And for a while, people believed it. They swallowed the story because it fit neatly into their expectations, their own need to believe that not everyone could see the truth. But the truth? The real truth? It didn't need defending. It was too clear to be twisted. It was too still to be drowned out by their noise. It waited patient, quiet, unmoving. While they spun their stories, creating new scripts where they were the martyr and you were the villain, you lived truthfully. You didn't try to correct the narrative. You didn't chase after their lies, didn't try to change their words or rewrite their version of the past. It didn't matter anymore. You knew the truth of your journey, the silence, the peace, the strength that came from walking away. You didn't need to be believed. You didn't need anyone else's approval. You were free. You let them lie. You let them rewrite the script. Because, in the end, their words were like erasers on paper, scrawled over pages that could never be rewritten. No matter how many times they tried to erase the truth, the real story, your story remained. Unchanged. You were no longer part of their performance. You were no longer the supporting character in their play. You were the author of your own life, and the pages you were writing were filled with clarity and honesty. Theirs was a story that would fade. The more they rewrote it, the more it fell apart. But you? You lived in the quiet certainty of your own truth, no longer needing to be validated, no longer needing to defend what was already clear. You were free, and that was the ending that no one could erase. You're not bitter. You're not angry. You're just done. The weight of everything that once consumed you, the chaos, the noise, the constant striving for validation is gone. It's like a room has finally been emptied of its clutter, leaving only peace. No more loud performances, no more playing a part. Just quiet, just stillness. You found peace in the mundane. In the ordinary moments that once felt small but now feel infinite. In the way sunlight spills through the kitchen window, how the soft hum of your morning coffee maker is a song that only you can hear. In the texture of your bare feet on cold floors, the scent of fresh sheets, the gentle sway of curtains in the wind. This is the life you've built now. Not for an audience, not for approval, but for yourself. And it feels like a home, a place where you can exist without the need to be seen, without the pressure to perform, where every movement is a choice, not a reaction. You no longer crave the spotlights. You don't need the applause. You don't need the drama. What you crave now is honesty, mutuality, depth, stillness. The world may be chaotic, but you've traded the adrenaline of the circus for the alignment of your own rhythm. You traded the noise for nourishment. You stopped seeking validation from the outside world and turned inward, where everything you needed was always waiting for you. You built a life where you don't need to scream to be heard, where your worth is not measured by the reactions of others, but by the simple truth of your own existence. You walk barefoot through the rooms you've created, feeling the coolness of the floor beneath you, the warmth of your hands as you build something real, something that doesn't require a stage. This is not a performance. It's your life. It's sacred. What you've built now isn't a stage. It's a home. It's a foundation that doesn't need the applause of others. The applause that once felt like it defined you now feels irrelevant, like distant echoes from a world you no longer belong to. And you'll never trade what you have now, peace, authenticity, depth, for clapping in someone else's show again. Because what you've gained is more than fleeting admiration. It's sacred, it's real, and you will never need to perform again. You are enough just as you are.